I want to thank Craftsy for sponsoring today's video. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Haley with Haley Stitches, and today I'm going to show you how to make a super quick and easy fat quarter quilt. You can grab a copy of the free pattern right now using the link in the description of this video. It's going to be free for the next week, and after that you can grab it for a low cost in my shop. So grab your fat quarters and let's get started. These are the supplies we'll need for today's quilt. We're going to need 2 1/8 yards of background fabric. You'll need 8 fat quarters or 4 half yards. I'm just pulling half yards out of my fabric stash. You'll need a long quilting ruler, a cutting mat, a rotary cutter, some sort of a marking utensil. You'll need pins. Well, they're optional, but super helpful. Matching thread. I'm using the color Dove by Aurifil. And some way to label your pieces. I like to use these alphabetties and clover clips. Everything I'm using will be linked in the description below. The first step is going to be to cut our background fabric. So I am going to lay it out and square up the edge to make sure I have a nice 90-degree angle to work with. The pieces we're cutting for this quilt are large, so most likely you're not going to have a huge 18-inch square ruler to use, and my long ruler here is not wide enough. So I'm going to use my long ruler in conjunction with my mat to make sure that I'm getting the big enough cuts. And I know that my mat and ruler have the same measurements, so that is why I'm able to do this. So I am finding the 18-inch line on my mat and using my long ruler to cut 2 18-inch wide by width of fabric strips. And then I'm going to cut 2 more long strips that will be 17.5 inches wide. So these are very long strips and very wide strips. So just take some extra care in making sure that everything is nice and accurate as you're cutting these big pieces. After we've cut our strips, we're going to rotate them and cut them down into squares. So first you'll want to trim off the selvage, and then you'll trim on the other side to get a total of 4 18-inch squares and 4 17.5-inch squares. So while I'm trimming the rest of my background fabric, I want to talk about the sponsor of today's video. This video is sponsored by Craftsy, your one-stop shop for all things creative. Craftsy is an amazing online community where you can learn new skills and find inspiration, whether you're into quilting, sewing, knitting, or crochet. This membership is perfect if you want to enhance your quilting skills, but it's also great if you want to start learning new crafts. They've got over 2,000 classes taught by friendly, award-winning instructors who break things down step by step. It's perfect for beginners and experienced makers alike. One class I've been loving is called Fun with Fat Quarters and Fat Ace by Ashley Huff. I think it pairs perfectly with this video. If you've ever wondered how to make the most out of those pre-cut fabrics, this class is a goldmine. Ashley walks you through everything: what fat quarters and fat ace are, how to cut them, and how to turn them into gorgeous quilt blocks and layouts. She even shares ideas for other pre-cut options, so you're covered no matter what's in your fabric stash. Right now, Craftsy is offering an incredible deal. The first 1,000 people to click the link in the description will get Craftsy Premium for a full year for just $1.49. That's down from the regular price of $123 a year. That means unlimited access to all of their classes for less than a cup of coffee. This offer is for new members only, so don't wait and join Craftsy today and start creating. Now it's time to cut our fat quarters, or in my case, half yards, because I am working through some fabric in my fabric stash. So the first color I'm going to cut is this kind of lavender, pastel lavender color, and I'm just squaring up the edge. For this, you do need the full 18-inch cut, so you do want to make sure that your fat quarters are cut accurately, or your half yards. So I'm squaring up both sides and using the lines on my mat again to make sure that I'm getting an accurate 18-inch cut here, so that I have a nice fresh surface to work from. So now that my half yard is cut accurately to 18 inches wide, I'm just going to rotate it and trim off that selvage. And then I'm going to cut it down to 18 inches again, just like we did with the background fabric. And because it's a half yard, I have 2 pieces layered on top of each other. So this is going to give me my 2 18-inch squares I need. And we are going to repeat that for the rest of our half yards or fat quarters. So here is all of the fabric we've cut so far, our fat quarters and our background fabric squares. I'm going to set aside the 17.5-inch background fabric squares and pair together all of these 18-inch squares. So here I have my pairs laid out according to the pattern, And you're basically just mixing and matching all of them together so that you get the right mix of half square triangles. And now we're just going to work through the pairs to make all of our 2 at a time half square triangles. So the first step is to draw a diagonal line corner to corner on one of the squares of the pairs. I like to do this on the lighter square because it just shows up a little bit better. And you can use your long quilting ruler for this. You will have to move it if your ruler isn't long enough, but just make sure it's still diagonal to diagonal. And then we're going to place the squares right sides together. So in my case, I'm working with solids, so there isn't necessarily a right side, but right sides together just means the pretty side of the fabric will touch the other pretty side of the fabric. So I'm making sure everything is nice and lined up here, and it can be really helpful to use pins with these super long squares. And I am going to sew a 1/4 inch away on both sides of that marked line. And if I was pinning this, I would probably do a couple pins on either side to make sure nothing shifts as you sew. And this is what it's going to look like after you've sewn it together. I'm just flipping it over so you can see it a little bit better. And this pattern is perfect for chain piecing if you just want to run all of these pairs together through the machine one after another. So the next step in our half square triangle assembly is going to be to cut along that marked line. So again, I'm going to have to shift the ruler as I go up just because these pieces are so big. And then we are going to press towards the darker fabric. So I'm going to be pressing towards that deep purple. So then you'll have 2 identical half square triangles. And now it's time to trim. And I'm going to show you how to do this without a 17.5-inch square ruler because I know a lot of us do not have that size ruler. So what you're going to do is look at your cutting mat. You'll see 3 lines here. There's a 30, a 45, and a 90. And we are going to be using that 45-degree line as a guide to help us cut this. So again, this is really important. So you need to make sure that your ruler matches the lines on your cutting mat so that everything is nice and accurate. So what I'm doing is I'm lining up my half square triangle in the corner of my mat, and then I'm making sure that diagonal line is lined up on both of these corners. And this is going to help me make sure everything is nice and square as I start trimming my half square triangle. You can use pattern weights or something heavy to make sure your fabric doesn't shift around as well. So I'm going to use my long quilting ruler and the lines on my mat to trim it to 17.5 inches. On screen, it looks like 18.5 inches, but everything is shifted in 1 inch just to make it a little bit more visible on camera so you can see those lines. But I am trimming all of these half square triangles down to 17.5 inches. So after I trim the first 2 sides, I will flip it around to make sure everything is lined up and then trim the remaining 2 sides so that I get a nice square half square triangle. And this is what it'll look like after you've squared it up, and you're just going to repeat that process for each of the pairings according to the pattern. So now we have all of our half square triangles assembled, and we have our 17.5-inch square background fabric. So we are going to start assembling our rows. So this is row 1, and we are going to assemble it again according to the pattern. And the placement is important with your colors of your fat quarters or your half yard fabric because you want to make sure that everything lines up nicely. So the first row is going to look like this with your fabric B and C triangles there, and you're going to have the white triangles on either side. Then for row number 2, we are going to pair all half square triangles. So for this one, you'll want the squares next to each other to match up, and then in the center you'll see that B and C fabric again. That's going to match up with row 1, and then on the end is the D fabric that will match up with the 3rd and 4th block. So just make sure all your half square triangles are oriented the correct way and the correct colors are touching the correct colors. And this is what row 2 will look like after it's assembled. And then you're just going to make another row 1 and row 2 with the exact same fabric in the exact same placement. So it'll be A, B, C, D, and you'll see they all come together at the bottom there. So here I have my row 1 and row 2, and then we are going to assemble them. The row 1s are pressed to the right, row 2s to the left, and that's going to make sure that all of our intersections nest, so everything will be assembled nicely and we won't lose any of those points. So here are my row 1 and row 2 assembled. And because we did duplicates of row 1 and row 2, I have 2 of the exact same pieces right here. So basically the top half of the quilt and the bottom half of the quilt here on top of one another. So I am going to show you how we're going to assemble the entire quilt top to get that nice pattern that we're looking for. So I'm going to pull one off and just rotate it 180 degrees. And then that will give us that star look that we're looking for. You'll know that everything is oriented the right way if on the diagonal your fat quarters match. So you can see my lavender is touching the lavender in the corner, the deep purple with the deep purple, etc. And again, we're just going to sew, making sure our seams nest so that everything meets up nicely. And this is what our final quilt top will look like. Here's kind of a closer view, but I'll give you a big view on my design wall. This quilt ends up being 68.5 inches square, which is a great size for a gift. And you can make the fabric super customizable, whatever you want. You could even make it a little bit scrappier if you wanted to and have all the fat quarters be different. So there's a lot of ways to make this quilt your own. Remember, you can grab the pattern for free and the link in the description of my video. Or if you're watching this a little bit later, you can grab it for a low cost in my shop. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.